Welcome to the ATA podcast, where we talk to former elite athletes sharing their insights and wisdom derived from successfully transitioning into life beyond the game. A very warm welcome to the Athlete Transition Accelerator podcast. Carl and I are delighted to be joined by Rachel Lewis, a former GB volleyball player, and we're looking forward to exploring her story of transition. Rachel, thank you very much for joining us today.
Pleasure, gentlemen. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Richard.
You're very welcome. Now, obviously, we're going to talk about life beyond sport, but as you may have gathered from some of our previous podcasts, we always like just to look back first at that sporting chapter. So I know you compete in the Olympics, you were at London 2012, but if you had to pull out one or two memories, things that elicit a sense of pride in you, Rachel, what comes to mind when you reflect on your sporting career?
Volleyball and indoor volleyball is a minority sport in the UK. If you want to play professionally, you need to go and play abroad. And lots of people who think they know the sport or have seen it often affiliate straight away to beach volleyball. So, it's a fantastic sport. And I don't take anything away from it. It's a great discipline. But when we had recognition of being able to not only get to Olympic Games, but also win a game at the Olympic Games has been going as a host spot, a freebie space in the games. And it was one of those moments where people actually stood up and went, oh, you are credible, you are worthy. That is something that we aren't just going to go and give a host spot to. That was a point where I think there was a wonderful moment of going, this is not parity. I don't think there'll ever be parity in elite sport, but a moment of recognition of going, we can be taken as a credible and worthy entity, and that's all that we were ever looking for.
Fabulous. And the journey from that Olympic career, I know will probably take us down different twists and turns to where you are currently today, but can you just give us a bit of an overview of your journey as you, I was going to say, hung up your boots, hung up your trainers from being a volleyball player. I think it was 2013 when you retired. Right. What did you do as you stepped out of that elite sporting world? And just give us a bit of an overview of how that journey is manifested to where you are today.
Yeah, of course. I think it's important to note that my transition, first of all, was not planned. It wasn't prepared for, and it wasn't on my terms. And I think those are things that I can now reflect on with real clarity. I was a player, I was an international player, so over 50 caps for England, 99 for Great Britain. And as soon as our European campaign finished, after the Olympics, when it's the Euros, we didn't qualify to the next round. Our whole national governing body was disbanded. So British volleyball did not exist because of the funding did not go forward from London to Rio. Okay. That meant I had no shirt to pull on anymore. So in other words, I couldn't represent Great Britain. The year in 2012, I'd been playing out in Poland. I had then, a year before that, I'd been out in France and in Sweden. And I said to myself, I don't particularly want to go away and play professionally when I can't come back and make a difference at home. It was always about representing Great Britain. It was about making sure the sport was in a great place and progressing. Can't do that for Great Britain, and I am slightly older, so the more mature athlete couldn't then fall back into Sport England's funding. So I was too old to represent England, and there was no way to represent Great Britain. So if I didn't want to go and pursue my own independent, which I could have done professionally and go back out and play in Europe again, then it was just time for me to hang my boots up. I played domestically. I competed back in England again. But the drive and the thing that got you out of bed in the morning didn't exist. And then that was a case of going, I can't do what I've always done. So, okay, as a person that's been in the system and been competing and sacrificing to get to the end, an idea of a break was refreshing. You looked forward to it. Then when the kind of break that you would have for a natural holiday or an extended holiday is over, you think, well, I'm carrying, and for me personally, I was carrying so much debt from competing and then now having to go and need an income. Well, then how do I get a job? Where do I get a job? Where do I turn to? Where do I live? Who do I turn up as? Like, it's stupid things like, what do I wear? It sounds really silly, but I was actually critiqued in one of my interviews to say what you're wearing wasn't appropriate. And it was just like, I couldn't get my head around as to the preparation that what you need to have in your locker when you step out away from the court. And like you say, the knee pads, the trainers have been hung up, and I'm not going to go back to that for my job. What I needed to then have to be able to go forward. So I was fortunate as I kind of got myself back into it was with Volleyball England, so the national governing body for English volleyball. They were looking for relationship managers. I was successful to get one of those positions. I stayed with them until the wonderful whole sport change. So basically 4 years of funding. They cut the funding. They got rid of people that were based out in the field, which was my role. So I was made redundant. And thankfully, that one of those positions had been placed within an organisation called Active Essex, who's a an active partnership. So funded again by Sport England, but that was an organisation that basically based in counties. How do you get people who were traditionally inactive to be active? So back into a sports environment, but actually not really able to show the true colours of me as a former professional athlete, as an Olympian. It's really hard to go in and identify with groups or to trying to go and talk to kind of system people around the power of physical activity when you kind of come from such a high exit, I suppose.
Hmm.
So when I was dealing with all of the things I think that transition throws at you, those two opportunities either allowed me to kind of stay in my comfort zone within Volleyball England, and then when I moved over to Active Essex, it was almost like I wore a cape. I didn't really show anybody my true identity. And then most recently, I'm transferred over to the Active Futura Foundation. We're a charitable organisation, and my true whole remit and purpose within the organisation is to help with athlete transition. So I'm now in a fantastic place. I'm now in a really, I feel incredibly fortunate and humbled to be able to be in the role that I am. But I suppose I didn't have a plan as to how to get here. I don't feel I was particularly prepared in getting to the point, and it definitely wasn't on my terms.
Right, right. Well,
Okay.
there's a lot a lot of fabulous insight there,
Yeah.
and my mind's pinging about. Carl, I'm going to throw it back to you because I see
Yeah.
you're scribbling, I'm
I
scribbling,
was
but I'll
scribbling.
let you jump in first here with Rachel.
Yeah, well, our usual next question you've answered. So now my head's like, okay, where do we go now? But I suppose we always talk about catalyst and planning and how the two go hand in hand. Ideally, in an ideal world, an athlete leaves on their own terms and there's a plan in place. All three of us know that that's not how it works. And you're a perfect example of that. You had it taken away from you from other powers that be. Now, I suppose in that environment, usually there's maybe one or two in which the decision is made and you leave the sport. But by the sounds of it, in your experience, this was potentially the whole GB setup and everybody that was
Yeah.
involved. So, in terms of what that period looked like, how much notice did you have that that was a potential outcome? And when that was told to you guys and you knew that was happening, was anything put in place to help you guys, or was it very much a case of off you go, on you go and do something else now?
I'd love to say there was an awareness. Unfortunately, there wasn't. And I'd love to say there was a moment in time where we could all, in theory, celebrate what we'd achieved and then move on. It was in the departure lounge of a Swiss airport.
Oh, jeez.
That we just all kind of sat, and the coach, it was kind of hard because of all the surroundings, and I remember the kind of emotion that people spoke to because we the nature of all being displaced across Europe, being in professional contract, meant that when we came together, it really was that was our identity. That was when I suppose we formed the greatest friendships, when we kind of made most progress in understanding what our team was and our values and our missions, etc. And I can honestly say I've never seen some of my teammates since that moment. And
Yeah.
I suppose that if you would have said, this is what to prepare for, or what would you have had in place? Like this will happen. Your contracts, you're now very much on your own, or that funding will stop. It will absolutely stop. Like, I don't know. I think I would have been in a different place and I would have had different things prepared. But unfortunately, there wasn't any awareness, and yeah, I think it affected all of us who had been representing Great Britain for years, and kind of very, very whole, not kind of assuming that it was a privilege to have. There was no kind of like, entitlement, but we were the best of the best, and I just felt at that moment in time when we weren't going to be going forward, and there was no opportunity to represent Great Britain ever and again. there was nothing in place to even kind of, well, here's who you turn to, or this might be the next step for you. There was nothing in place.
And that, I think, in itself is a powerful message for people listening to this, Rachel, because one of the things we talk about on a daily basis with athletes in a diverse range of disciplines is that we sincerely hope you retire on your terms. We are not about accelerating you to the end of your sporting chapter. What we're trying to do is accelerate you through the period of transition. And so our overarching message is it's never too early to start investing in your future. You may hopefully have 10, 15 years, who knows, of competition ahead of you, but there is the chance that things can happen outside of your control that bring your sporting chapter to a close earlier than expected. And the place that most people's minds go to is injury. Those horrendous situations where people get a career-ending injury and they're forced to then step into the next chapter. You're giving us a painful but powerful insight into where economic impacts come to pass, where funding was withdrawn and a team was disbanded. So I think the pain of your message will hopefully have a positive connotation to people listening to this, that we must be thinking about what we want to do next. And I suppose that takes us into another challenge that I know you had to wrestle with, that if you're playing Premiership football, for instance, or you're at the very top of the sporting hierarchy, often finances are such that you can focus solely on that discipline. But as we all know, in women's sport particularly, there's a disparity between the male and the female game. So finance is often much more of a pressure. And then when you step out of those professional disciplines and into things like the Olympic disciplines, even more so. So I know it's something that you also had to wrestle with prior to that terrible news. To compete at an elite level, sometimes you're also having to look for a career, not just when you finish and when you hang up the knee pads and trainers, but also whilst you're still competing. And that was the case for you for a period of your career as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you remember when we won the right to win the Olympic Games, I was actually sat in a business meeting because I'd had a break between playing professionally in Sweden. I'd come home and I'd kind of gone, do you know what, maybe volleyball's behind me. But as England, or so I should say, London won the right to host, there's just this kind of like moment of going, oh my goodness, this is possible. So start making, inquiries and understand when the trial dates are, how do I get there? But I actually had a full-time job at that point. So then I was like, how do I manage that? And they were like going, well, yes, you'd be asked to come train full time. At that point, it was the English Institute system. So the English Institute of Sport in Sheffield would be the home for British volleyball. Yes, you can come, but at the moment that's home, we're still a development sport. So I don't know if you know much about the kind of athlete performance awards, but it wasn't a case that we were on a band A, a B, a C. We were all the way down at the bottom. So when we finally did get the funding through, it was £8,000 a year, which a lot of people would say, that's an amazing amount of money to be able to put towards your training costs. And it is. I will never, ever, ever say otherwise, that I'm not grateful for the support that I got. But anybody who's trying to live, to sustain, to train where you live, you've unturned every stone to be able to get 1% performance gains. You can't do that on a shoestring.
Yeah.
And I don't even think £8,000 a year, or definitely not in this area that we live in, can allow you to do that. So you're right. When I was in the employment, I kept that alongside. So I tried to keep that. And there was a point I remember having my head coach had to sit down and said, I understand what you're doing, but if you really want to push on to that next and to be in the kind of that pool that can be considered, in the I suppose the highest performance pool, you're going to have to make a decision, Rach. And I was like, this is helping to sustain, to top up, to allow to be able to get the access. And I made the decision to stop work at that point. But at the same time, 3 years out before the Olympics, our team, so the women's team, unfortunately dropped their funding. They had that funding cut. There's 6 disciplines that go across volleyball. two indoor, two beach, so male and female indoor beach, indoor, and then also sitting, the Paralympic disciplines as well. And they could only take a certain amount of teams through. And for, I don't wish to get into this because the podcast could go way off course. But basically, the British indoor women's team dropped all their funding. So then, not only then as individuals were you strapped for cash, but our team was strapped for cash. So instead of being supported and going into hotels, we were staying in fire. Basically. I've completely lost the thought, but it's the fire station. So we were where people would do the training. So the fire station was where we would stay.
Right.
People would then be like getting, I suppose, minibuses around. We could have hire cars that were donated to us. You know, everything that I think you assume professional teams, or those who are high performance, all of those support services. So S&C, psychology, all of your nutrition. It had to be provided outside of the IS. So
Right.
again, we had to diversify our income again. We had to make sure not only as an individual, we were trying to be able to raise the funds, but at the same time, our team had to raise the funds. So we were trying to do bike rides. We would cycle from London, cycle from Sheffield all the way down to London to try and bring awareness to the fact that we were going to be playing at Earl's Court, but we had no money to get there. We were trying to find sponsorships. So is there anyone that could kind of go on the back of our shirts, on the back of our shorts? We were trying to do everything just to make sure that we had got budget to be able to be in the best space for preparation, and it was so hard.
I mean, I can only imagine. You know, when you think about elite performance, you don't think of sleeping in the fire station and having to self-fund so much of it. So credit to you and your teammates for doing that. I suppose the follow-up to that is, would it be fair to say that the resilience that's given you, and I suppose there's an element sometimes where elite sportsmen and women are a little bit closeted. Things are all done for them. And when they step into the world beyond that, it's a much harder adjustment. Perhaps the adversity you had to deal with, and that juggling and that fundraising and that sheer sort of determination to actually generate the level of funding required to compete, whilst probably gave it a sense of injustice and frustration at the time. I wonder how that served you as an individual as you stepped out of the sport, and particularly in your case now with the work you're doing in the foundation and supporting other athletes, it probably gives you a real sense of empathy and understanding for what people are going through, because you've experienced the extreme element of what it takes to compete at an elite level.
We often smiled and said, cool runnings. And when you see the adversity that a team's gone through, would anyone come and ask us to do a come back and look at our journey? Because it did have parallels, but you're right. Nobody, I don't think yes, if they had a magic wand and said, if we could have made this aspect a little bit easier, if we'd have had some of the access to services, particularly if we were on a common ground and footing to some of the other sports, it would have made it a little bit more enjoyable, agreed. But nobody takes away from what we achieved, and how we did it. And I think you're right. How my personality has developed as a result, how we have a commonality that no one can take away from us, the journey that we went on, the kind of the highs and the lows. It is character building. It is massively confidence boosting at the same time as demotivating.
Yes.
But I don't ever take anything away from the journey. And I don't think anybody in my team would either, when they reflect and say, we took it on, we actually took the journey on, and it wasn't bump free, but it helped define us, and it helped us grow as individuals and as a team.
Absolutely. And a flashback with cool runnings there. That's an absolute classic from the memory bank. I wonder if anyone had the lucky egg in the volleyball team. But something you mentioned a few minutes ago, Rachel, I just want to take you back to, was around the challenges of identity, because this is something that comes up a lot. And you mentioned the critique you had at a job interview, and that's a classic scenario for me. That there's a lady I used to work with. She had one of her stock phrases was, "People don't know what they don't know," which sounds like a riddle, but is so true. And when you've been in an environment, whatever your sporting discipline, you know that world intimately. You know the S&C requirements, the nutritional requirements, the skill, the tactical requirements, and then you step into industry. And it's a real area of passion and focus for Carl and I, because it's things like interview prep. It's things like what you wear and exactly what you talked about, how to handle and conduct yourself in an interview. These are all invaluable skills that there's no reason why you need to wait until you stop competing to start acquiring, because the fear of transition is often based around ignorance and the unknown. So one of the best ways to reduce that fear is to remove some of the ignorance and to engage with whoever feels right, whether it's ATA or any of the other wonderful organizations that you work with at the foundation. They're all there to give knowledge and wisdom so that you don't have those scenarios. But I think that's something, when you said it, you encapsulated it perfectly. I was critiqued for what I was wearing, and presumably that was just pure ignorance. It's probably one of the first interviews you'd had to go to, and no one had ever given you any guidance in that space.
Absolutely. And I suppose your identity, I was always the volleyball player. And volleyball players don't, I'm not saying that I was scantily clad, don't get me wrong,
No.
but I had on a dress and a pair of heels. And it was a case of going, I thought that was appropriate. It was work attire in my mind. I've managed to secure the position, and the first feedback from the CEO was that wasn't relevant. And you're right. Is it somebody that you turn to your immediate family and then do a bit of sense check and you walk out the door? Am I smart enough? Do I look smart enough for the interview? Is it something that someone's given me a power pack slide deck around, kind of, here are the pointers when preparing for that interview? Is it around, oh, well, I first joined, what are those foundations or those building blocks that you are helped along when you join a performance program around, kind of, these are the milestones and how do we prepare you? Because there is your comment earlier around the preparation and onboarding. Nobody wants to do the kind of scaremongering or doomsday scenario of a career ends, but it's for all of us to appreciate. It is an absolute privilege to work and play and enjoy elite and professional sports. But there is a retirement from it. There is a day where you no longer do that playing part. So how do you then make sure that you're in the best frame and possible space so that when it does come, you're ready? And I don't think you can ever do that too soon enough, because if you are only that person, and I was only the volleyball player turns up to the job interview, the volleyball player turns up and sits around the table when the topic has changed.
Yeah.
And I still, it's crazy right now, because I still struggle with the fact that I am married and I've changed my surname because my player name was different. And when you kind of was like, this is Lewis, and I'm like, no, I need to tell them it's different. And I'm like, well, I've obviously not dealt with everything here, because I've clearly moved on. It's been a massive stretch of time, and I can't disassociate of Rachel label on the volleyball player. I'm now Rachel Lewis, the non-volleyball, and it's like these two personas. And I think people don't have to have that. You can wear multiple lenses. You can show up in different guises, and I think we should be promoting that. There's more to us than just the player, and start that prep early. And whether that's lots of shadowing as to what you don't want to do, whether that's lots of curious conversations and growing that network so it's there when you want it. There's loads of things that you can do, but I'm also really mindful that you have to have the environment, the culture around you in that performance sport that allows you to curiously go and look at that and not be penalized or not made feel guilty that you're also growing yourself at the same time as you are competing.
Yeah, and it's so wonderful to hear you articulating your thoughts on this, because one of the main raison d'etre for developing this podcast, Rachel, is Carl and I are having conversations on a daily basis, and you hear themes and you hear patterns, and then you hear wonderful insights like you're providing. You think, well, we're the only ones to hear it. So we wanted to build the podcast to share that and broaden that reach, but also to encourage people when you're hearing these themes, which we are now repeated on the podcast, to say, well, it can't be wrong when so many people from such a diverse array of backgrounds and disciplines are saying the same thing. And to your point, it's never too early to start. Take pride in preparing. It's something that we want everybody to hear, because when you think of your sporting discipline, if somebody said, here's an X factor, here's a 1 or 2% improvement in your performance if you do this particular S&C exercise, or you develop this nutrition plan, or you go and speak to this psychologist, everybody does it. And we want people to think with the same mindset for the transition to any bit of time you spend where you're not just wasting an afternoon away in a coffee shop or sitting on a console, and you're actually doing something to invest in your skills. Doesn't have to be hours and hours a day, but just regular touch points to invest in yourself so that whenever that transition comes, it's not something to be daunted. And I think that what you're talking about really lines up with that. It's a competitive advantage. You want to step into an interview environment, not thinking, well, I'm Rachel, the volleyball player. It's I'm Rachel. I'm coming in. I've got a diverse array of skills, some honed in sport, some honed outside of sport, but I have a whole skill set that I can bring to this role. And the identity point, I also just wanted to pick up there because you talk about I'm still working through this, and that's completely normal and natural as well. I don't think there's any elite sportsman that's been able to find the magic pill or the silver bullet to say the day I finished, I just moved on. And we referred to an article recently with Dan Carter, one of the most famous rugby players in the world, the ex-New Zealand All Black fly half, talking about how he'd struggled with adjusting to life beyond being Dan Carter, the iconic fly half for New Zealand. It's very, very normal. And I think it does take time and you've got to be patient with yourself. But one of the ways to help you make that adjustment goes back to the same point: invest in yourself, prepare for life so you can start to see that new identity blossoming. And you've got the confidence that there's more to you than just the sporting career. So I'm reverberating back to what you've said, Rachel, but I think it's important to frame it because you're yet another voice from a very different background, highlighting specific tips that I think every athlete listening to this, whatever their discipline, whatever their age profile, can embrace and hopefully utilize for their successful transition.
Absolutely. There's not a lot of time in theory when you think about how many hours that you're either on the court, you're in the gym, you're resting, you're sleeping. But there's always, I mean, the power of the mobile phone or the digital, like you can be sending emails, you can be looking for, as I said, to grow that network. There's more time than I think you give yourself credit for. So it's how you build it in, and it's more mindset. It's a mindset of curiosity around wanting to have a look around. How do I develop myself as well as being an individual, as well as the athlete? So I think until you're in that headspace, though, you can tell somebody about it, you can prepare them for it. But until they're ready to kind of take that on, there'll always be a battle around that prioritization.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure.
And I also like the point you made about wearing a cape. I thought that was a wonderful analogy to utilize. And I think that from our perspective, ties in with another key message. Don't pressurize yourself to think you're going to step out of sport and find the perfect fit in the very first thing that you do. You might. Some people are very lucky and blessed to say, I step out of sport into a role and it's perfect. But the majority of people that we've engaged and spoken to have tried one or two things at least before they find the right fit. And you've got to listen to your gut. And your gut feel of, I felt I was almost wearing a cape. I couldn't really bring the true Rachel to the fore. And now you've moved into the foundation and the role you're currently in. And I forget your exact words, but you found your true fit in essence. So I think that's another important message, that you may try things, you may find that it's not right. That's okay. You're not signing up for life. You can reverse out of something and move in another direction until you find the actual fit.
Absolutely. I don't disagree with that. And I've got this wonderful terminology. And yes, and the only thing that comes with that is the financial responsibility or burden. Yes, you're absolutely right. A role that you pursue and go, that's not for me, that's as valuable as trying to go, all my eggs are in one basket, and it will come off. So working away. But I think when I came out, I think I had about £10,000 worth of debt from competing. It was like you don't want to have to then take on more or to go from a period of unemployment to increase that. So it's that mindful bit around, yeah, the exploration part. But if you could do more of the exploration part on program or in clubs, that kind of financial burden lessens considerably at the other side. So don't be afraid to make the movements. You follow your instincts and you definitely go where the energy is around careers. But I don't think you need to kind of, put all your eggs in one basket to go, I can't do this if you've prepared well financially.
Yeah. And again, it's another core message, Rachel. You talked about building your network, and we've had a lot of guests reference the fact that you've got so much more leverage within your network when you are still Rachel, the GB volleyball player,
current.
when you are current.
Yep,
exactly. So what we always say to people is leverage that to explore opportunities. They might not necessarily be paid opportunities, but you will get through more doors when you are still current to have a look at what a sector looks like, so that when the time comes, you're a bit more informed, then step into something with a perceived thought process, and then you get in and find the reality is very different. It's not for you. So you can rule things in or out by exploring your existing networks, sponsors, whatever that may be, to get into those organizations and be a bit more informed. It helps remove that financial burden, because you're absolutely right. Once you're out and you need to pay the bills, if you feel it's not a right fit, you might actually end up being trapped just because you need the finances. Whereas if you can rule things in and out before finance becomes the determining factor, I think that's another great call to action, if you will, to utilize your network and explore opportunities now, wherever you are on the journey. Start looking around you and looking for opportunities to learn about what interests you.
Yeah, and I think some people find that daunting. It's not in their personality, it's not their skill set, it's not a wheelhouse, however you want to describe it.
Yeah.
But I think there's, like you say, there's organizations out there at the moment. There's this wonderful network of organizations that can help, and it doesn't have to be, it's not like a full training course, or it's not a big time commitment, but it's almost like going and being a library of resources that you call upon and as and when you need them, to be able to kind of go, actually, how do I build a network? I might have got however many X thousand people following on TikTok or etc., but I don't know how to DM, or
Yeah.
I have got DMs, but do I need to go and do an individual meeting with every one of them? And it's just knocking around with colleagues, with peers in your own kind of training groups, and just growing that understanding of where to start, because that is all most of the time the most daunting, of
Yes.
kind of having that confidence, is that I feel like I'm about to, embark on eating the elephant. It's just too big. I don't
Yeah.
know where to go. But there are people out there that can help, such as yourselves, and there are other great organisations that just they'll give a helping hand when needed. It doesn't have
Yes.
to be at the end.
No,
No,
I think you've
absolutely.
been reading our sort of mission statements and various documentation, I think, Rachel, because you're right. Social media to a lot of elite athletes is very much about, well, how many followers do I have on whatever platform they're using? And what we've found, and we're now working closely with a diverse range, is actually it's not really about how many people follow you. It's how you're utilizing that network. And exactly as you say, who are you connecting with? Who are you learning from? Who are you sending messages to? Who are you picking up the phone or a Zoom call to learn from? And particularly on platforms such as LinkedIn, there's a whole array of opportunities there if you utilize it properly. It's not just about looking at the latest dance or cat video and getting something that's enhances followers. Well, how useful are those followers? You're better off having 100 really good connections than 1,000 just random posters that don't really help you develop. So yes, ignorance around that is not a critique, it's an observation that a lot of athletes are nervous about, saying, I don't really know how to use it. And that's absolutely fine. I think it's encouraging people to break down these barriers. When you're in your elite environment, if you don't understand an element of what you're doing, you ask the coach. You question a tactic or a strategy. If there's a particular element, perhaps in your world, serving or whatever it may be, you develop the knowledge, you speak to the people who are good at it, you learn from them, you go to the coach, and that's just an accepted way of how you improve in sport. Things like social media and life beyond sport, it's exactly the same. Why struggle in sort of the darkness and the ignorance? Go to people who can help you, people who are utilizing it well. It's no different to how you develop in sport. It's just a mindset shift that it's not a silly question. It doesn't make you look daft. What's worse is just pretend you know when you don't know, and then drift into your transition without the right tools and without having built a brand, which I think is really important for elite sportsmen and women to start developing their brand and their narrative, because that all ties in back to your point around interview prep, etc. You have a story to tell. You want to refine it and polish it so that you draw out the strengths of elite performance, but apply it to how you can be an asset to somebody in industry. So again, I think you've touched on another really powerful area. So in terms of your fit now, Rachel, where you are in the foundation, obviously it's fascinating. I love the agenda that you've got. It certainly piques your interest, because on the one side, when you look at the foundation, it's saving the rainforest, which I think is a wonderful cause. Carl and I both agree in that. And then bolted into that is very much about athlete support. So probably you are the most aligned guest we've ever had on the podcast, because you are very much about doing exactly what we're trying to do to help people. So how are you finding that? I think I read on your website you're focusing more on people that are in those disciplines, perhaps the Olympic disciplines, etc., as we've alluded to, that won't have as much financial stability from their sporting chapter. Is that fair to say that's where a major area of the focus is?
Yeah, as an organisation, we've only been going a year. We're brand new. It's fantastic that we've got a philanthropic donor that wants to be able to put funding into this. That actually people who have represented Great Britain and England and Ireland, Scotland, Wales, that actually when you get to the very top of your game, life shouldn't be less when you're finished. It should be as enriching, it should be as enjoyable, it should be as fulfilling. And we wanted to say, well, where do we get the best impact? And I think for us, particularly those that don't necessarily have big player associations, that don't have big wages, those where, and I'm biased, obviously, you've heard that we speak to development sports, but there's those out there that I think their sacrifice has been it is on the same level as anybody at the very height of their game and their career. So actually, how can we help the most amount of athletes, and where do we invest those funds? So for the time being, just for these past 12 months, we've focused on Olympic sports. Lots of the funding that we gave out over the last 12 months have been towards people who've been transitioning in and around Paris. With regards to if you were striving to get to there, or if you've kind of competed at the highest level, then you can access free programs, and those free programs go across 6 different partners, offering a really vast range. There's one side of the kind of partnership that offer professional skills. There's another side that really look at professionals. Like, for example, am I the same person with the same values and morals and goals in life when I'm wearing a shirt and I am that player? And if I step outside, do I still have those? And how do I go into a forum where there's people around me so that we're in exactly the same position? Might not be the same sport, might not have even identified and been in the same home nation, but we're going through those same issues, and it's really cathartic to be able to find a sense of identity again and a sense of belonging and be able to share, because actually they're all in the same boat. So we haven't got to the end of that kind of round of funding and those partners that we're working with, but we're really encouraged that the collaboration, understanding that the network for those or people who need help is there, trying to make the landscape a little bit easier to navigate. There isn't a one-stop place that any athlete across can go and turn to. It's different depending on the level of funding, the sport that you sit in, unfortunately, the gender that maybe represent. So how do we make it so that it is incredibly clear and it's very easy to access? Because at the moment, it is tricky to navigate. So that's what we're trying to hopefully be able to have a positive impact on. And at the moment, we're currently in the middle of writing our strategy. 3, 5 years, 10 years, what does it look like? And you're right, we might pivot. We might want to say we want to go into the professional sports, but at the same time, it's understanding where the greatest need is. I don't disagree that anybody that's had a professional contract, and this is an example, a footballer would have any different example, an example of poor transition to me. It's just that at the same time, maybe the support around what the club can access, or I suppose what a player association could access, or maybe the finances that you're able to acquire at the same time just set you in a slightly different position to others.
No, I think that's very fair. I think you're very balanced in what you say, Rachel, and I think we wholeheartedly agree. You can see that, and I always think it's one of the challenges. You watch the Olympics, we all watch Olympic sport and think, wow, it's such an entertaining spectacle. But those hard yards, that training and the commitment is just as high for those athletes as it is for any of the so-called bigger professional sports. But the rewards are not the same. I think everybody can recognise that. So it makes perfect sense where you are aligned. And we're probably going to keep learning as much from you, because you'll be researching and seeing things with all your interactions with athletes as we are as well, Rachel. It's something we were talking about before we brought you onto the podcast, wasn't it, Carl? In terms of some of the insights you've probably got that we'd be interested to sort of pick your brains on as well.
Love to, and that's the beauty of it, is that this is that the organisations are absolutely leaning in for the right reason. Nobody sits in this space because they're going to make lots of money. That's not it. And how do we all come together, show best practice, share the learning, share the insights, grow that awareness, create the noise around the issue, not to point blame, not to kind of say this is anybody's fault, but to be able to encourage better practice, so that actually transition, when we speak about transition, it's not like when I look around and say, oh, do you know what, 10 years ago, is in 10 years it's in a much better place because of that nature of going, we're all in this, so that ideally we'd be out of a job.
Yes, exactly.
There is no reason for organisations to exist, because that Carl, the very first question that you asked was around how much awareness and how did you prepare for it, and what were the terms when you were told that you were no longer a team? Like, if that happens, that every national governing body had an exit interview and a release plan, and then an organisation that could then give you that support, and it exists in some. So the high performance, world class performance pathways at the moment, they've got some fantastic people and teams that work for up to 2 years after you come out. But that's one part of the system. It's not for everybody, and everybody doesn't get to access that. So how is it that we bring the awareness and the accountability, the responsibility? Yes, it's on the athlete, but the systems around it need to be in place in order for them to truly be accessing services that they need. It's not one, one brushstroke fits all.
No.
Yeah.
How is it that kind of landscape is diverse enough to get that curiosity in the first place, but also help them in the real need of transition? Because there'll be some people like myself that unfortunately don't prepare for it. So when you're in that kind of free fall moment, organisations such as yourself and those others that the Ekatura Foundation have funded to date, they're there. They're there as that safety net, and they catch and they can help. And you're still going to experience those bumps.
Yes.
But you're not lonely. You're not there just trying to tackle it all on your own.
No. I think just to your point then as well, Rachel, about you weren't prepared for that transition. You're not in a minority there. And it doesn't matter what the sport is. The majority of athletes aren't ready for that decision. When that time comes to move on, they're not ready. And you're right. And to your point, you've made several amazing points, and I've been scribbling down like a maniac. You'll often find that's what I do. I listen, and then ideas come from these conversations. But you mentioned earlier about there needs to be a library of content. And that's where the podcast came from. And the conversations James and I were having behind closed doors was very much, people need to hear this. It needs to be from an athlete that's been there and done it and walked the path to those that are yet to navigate that transition. And the whole point of this is a library of content that athletes can dip into as and when they're pleased. They don't need to talk to anybody. There's no barrier to entry. It's just sit in there, listen to what people have got to say. And I'm going to go off on a little tangent here. You've just mentioned better practices. And I know you know this guy very well, I had the pleasure of chatting to Professor Lavallee last week about transition and all of the incredible work he's doing in that space, and has been for 3 decades. He's been working in this space for. And it's almost getting to a point now where the research is quite overwhelming, but there's not that much noise around it about the impact in performance for athletes that are growing themselves outside the game.
Yeah.
And James and I have had this fed back from us, particularly Gareth Steenson. He's been on the podcast, but he's also an ambassador of ours, about when he realised he was sort of in the last 2 to 3 years of rugby, and he started to put plans in place. He developed a restaurant. He built a bar. He started to have these businesses. His engagement within the game went through the roof. He felt like he was a better athlete. He performed better. He was happier. And it all stemmed from the ability to switch off and leave. And I'm not sure whether that's something you've had fed back from previous athletes that you've worked with, or the other foundations that you're working with. Is that something that you see now as a real common theme? It's just...
I don't think it's necessarily a common theme, and I absolutely advocate for Professor Lavallee. He's a fantastic asset and ally in this space, and you're right, sitting there, not in isolation. He's not in isolation. There's other people who really are trying to champion the research. It's not common, but the effects are less common around that prep. So therefore, we are actually, as an organisation, trying to understand how can we capture the monitoring, the evaluation, the learning around performance on court. So actually, if you're doing the building blocks and you've gone into the library and you've actually gone, you know what, I now can know where I want to go, or I've got building blocks in place to be able to get to a degree, or is it a case of an apprenticeship? And all of a sudden, I step onto the court later on that day, and that slight fear, the anxiety is lifted a little bit. My head's up, and I'm now in I'd never say that I was in the zone in volleyball, never. But at the same time, you've got a slightly bigger bandwidth to take on, because the worry or the stress or the strain around what's next has quietened. And I think that's where, as an industry, we've got to get better at documenting that. I don't think there's a lot of people that would say at the time, oh, do you know what, my efficiency or my kind of performance, tangible results. But I think that's what we need to be able to go back into performance environments to kind of say to coaches or PDs and say, it is as the marginal gains that I spoke to around the gym, around the psych and the mental approach and nutrition, you're right, you would do anything to unturn that. So why is it that actually, if you can say developing yourself at the same time, the dual careers, the curiosity and the growth mindset around being more than just an athlete, that is as powerful with regards to aiding performance. And we really have to get better at capturing that so it does become the norm, so that we can turn around and evidence the performance gains so that people then want to take this topic more mindfully and hold it in much higher priority. Because at the moment, I learned this very quickly as a player that when playing in professional entities, I'm a commodity to satisfy and serve. And that's absolutely fine if you can live with that. But when that commodity is therefore gone and off the shelf, somebody is chasing as quickly to take your place. So that club is therefore constantly mindful about this, around that kind of filling the role, bettering, how's the season, how do we build, etc. Nobody then goes, well, actually, it's really important to look after those people because they are people, they're humans, and they're more than just the athlete. So if it was around the performance piece, we can start it, which means that their well-being is taken care for much earlier on, rather than just going as afterthought, or we have to do something in retrospect. Oh, geez, they've left and they're not in a good space mentally. How can we help them? I think if you go back and go, well, actually, if you help them earlier, it helps the performance. You get much more rounded individuals who've got more headspace, who can then take on more in performance environments, and you've also helped them afterwards. It's a win-win.
Yeah. And I think you frame it really well, Rachel. And Carl and I have spoken a lot about this. And for us, it's common sense. When you're in that elite athlete environment, one of the things that all coaches are trying to do is help you cope with pressure. Why is it if you're swinging a golf club, just you and a friend, it's easy. But if you put 50 people within 3 feet of it, it feels very different. Why is it when you're training as a team, volleyball in an empty gym, it's one thing. If you're in a stadium, it's a different thing because your mind reacts differently to pressure. And there's no doubt for us that if you've got anxiety about the future, that's a form of pressure. So why not alleviate it? We try and alleviate pressure from a competitive element, but anybody, well, they'd be in denial if they've got things on their mind that are causing them anxiety or fear, it doesn't compromise performance. I think it does in all walks of life. And without a shadow of a doubt, fear of the future, fear of how to step into the next chapter, fear about what you're going to be doing next creates a pressure. And whether you're consciously aware of it or not, that can compromise performance. So I think we're all on the same page with that. I think it's a wonderful way to sort of bring the conversation to a conclusion. And I've really enjoyed, I know, Carl, you've already sung the virtues of Rachel. You two have had a few conversations prior to this. I've really enjoyed hearing your insights, Rachel. I suppose one of the key questions to ask is, where do people find you? Because people will be intrigued about what you do and intrigued about the foundation. I'm sure we're very much aligned with our philosophies between ATA and what you're doing as well. So what's the best place for people to find you? Would that be on LinkedIn?
Yeah, absolutely. LinkedIn, there's me as I think I put myself as a former professional volleyball player. So yeah, not even like my role at the foundation. So that's something for me to consider. But I am on LinkedIn. I used to say Twitter. I'm on X, underneath my label and profile. I am, as a foundation, we are really open and wanting to help the kind of topics around this. So that there isn't anybody that I think that we should close doors on. So the more people that we can genuinely kind of bring together and help collaborate in this space, for me, that's the best thing around it.
Fabulous. And we'll put the link to the foundation website in the show notes for this episode as well, so that people will be able to find that as well. Well, Rachel, all that remains to be said is a huge thank you for sharing your time and your wisdom with us today. We wish you the best of luck with the foundation. And we know, I'm sure this won't be the last time we speak, because we're so aligned in terms of what you're trying to do and what we're trying to do with helping athlete transition. So thanks again from Carl and I. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
No, to both of you, thank you. It's commendable that you've actually taken on the the podcast, that you're bringing noise to this, that you truly want to lean in and help others. I mean, it's people like such as yourself that are really helping. So thank you from my perspective in a senior role, but also lovely to chat to both of you. Like you say, we could go on for hours.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Rachel.
Thanks for joining us this week on our ATA podcast. If you found this conversation insightful and it resonates with your journey, please subscribe, follow the show, and stay connected with us for more insight, resources, and information on how we at ATA are supporting your preparation for life beyond the game.